Hey, you've made it to the podcast Recovery Captured, hosted by me, Shannon Louise, a certified recovery coach and self-verified addict. Join me on my journey through my recovery from mind-altering substances, eating disorders, depression, and much, much more. During this podcast, you'll hear my personal experience, thoughts, and opinions, as well as my guests' stories through their own recovery. I hope that you're able to take something away from this podcast and use it as a tool to help you see that your story is picture perfect. Feel about it?
I feel great.
You feel great?
Yes.
All right. You want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Andrew. I'm an alcoholic and an addict.
Okay. Give us the goods. What are you in recovery for? What's your recovery date? And give us a fun fact about you.
Okay. Recovery for primarily opiates and cocaine, but I wasn't necessarily super picky. Sobriety date is May 11th, 2011. And a fun fact, I was thinking about this because obviously I've heard on your previous shows. More of a in recovery fun fact is that I got, well through a fellowship primarily rooted in alcoholism, and I've never been drunk. Otherwise.
You've never been drunk?
I haven't been.
Is that your fun fact right now?
It's a pretty fun fact. Yeah. I mean, I didn't know. Some people were using facts based in their sobriety or their recovery, and then others were just random. I have a few random too, but I think that's the most fun fact.
Wow. That blows my mind. When people say that, or like people haven't done drugs or smoked weed or whatever, it blows my mind as if like, what did you do as a adolescent?
Yeah. I stopped using substances before I turned 21. So I think that has something to do with that. Mm-hmm. But also there's alcoholism in my family. And I was able to kind of see what kind of destructive power that can have. Okay. And it turned me off from it enough to kind of stay away through my high school years. And then, inevitably find Oxycontin and other substances. And that was what I, then used alcoholically pretty mm-hmm. much. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
And what are some other random fun facts that you said you have?
Again, last night thinking about it, the only thing came to mind is I am the fifth Andrew in my family.
Really?
Yes, Andrew James Uhouse the fifth. So if I have a son, I'm kind of doomed to keep on that lineage. But
nice.
Pretty fun.
Nice. All right, and let's get into your story a little bit. Like what? You said you got sober before you were 21.
Mm-hmm.
So what age were you when you got sober?
I was 20, fresh,
mm-hmm.
Well, May 11th. So yeah, just a few months into my 20th year on this world. I grew up in New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. It's generic at this point, but great family, real loving, had everything I needed. Was pretty convinced from my earliest memories that I was broken in a way that no one else was, that no mm-hmm. one could really understand, just in the way that I was feeling and kind of the way my brain operated. I really latched on to people, really latched on to, I guess, identities in whatever circles that I was in, just really not knowing who I was and constantly searching for that. Again, just discomfort in crowds, but like an ego in crowds at the same time. Just a real weird mixture of emotions, in my younger days that I could find. Everyone kind of has their own perception on this as well. As far as addiction goes, I think I was kind of pretty predisposed to that. I think I was, kind of an addict at a young age, way before I found substances, mm-hmm. Just in the way that I maneuvered, nothing made sense to me. Like the world didn't make sense.
In what way? What do you mean?
I guess more so just like the way that I perceived things. I just nothing. I never felt 100%. I never felt really anything. I guess there was not a lot of emotion, especially in the sense of happiness. It was more so just constant anxiety and longing and trying to figure out kind of how people did this, right? Like how do we do life? Because prior to getting well, honestly, and prior to like having some step work and some solutions like brought into my life, I really just like had no concept on how to live.
Did you have a concept of like who you were, or like when you mentioned you would kind of just like blend in more so? Was that you putting on like a mask to try to fit into every crowd that you hung out with?
I think so. Yeah, it was more of just like a constant, right, which I've come to find out being like some real self-seeking behavior there, where I was just constantly just trying to be accepted, trying to fit in somewhere, trying to be accepted, whether that was with, the like snowboarding crowd in high school, if it was with the sports kids, if it was with the drama kids, it didn't matter. I was just trying to be friendly and like fit in and be accepted by whoever was, near. But, like I said, when I found substances of any kind, right, whether it was marijuana at a real young age, that was never something that I enjoyed, but back to the constant need to just be accepted. If my friends were, I was, and like that's what I had to do to be cool and to fit in. And when I was introduced to opiates, that at that time was my solution to life. So it would have been kind of asinine, and I explain it this way, and I still hold to it. Almost 10 years, a little after, that it was a medication. It was a solution to the way I felt. Nothing had ever made me feel at ease and as if I fit in and as if I, could talk to strangers. And, and it started like that and didn't necessarily end like that. But I didn't necessarily see what I was doing as an issue because, finally I had found something that fixed me as a person.
Now, was this prescribed to you?
It was not.
Okay,
no, it was
you
not.
Just found.
Yeah. Just I grew up in it's kind of the same sad song and dance where it was just a really slow, boring town. A summer vacation spot for everyone from Massachusetts, and like the summers were kind of cool and there was stuff to do, but in the winters it was just real long and boring and nothing to do. And it just was introduced to me by a family member actually, and again I just didn't look back. It was just kind of one of those things where I found the fix and the cure to the way that I felt.
So you mentioned that you didn't get drunk because you saw it in your family. You seeing drug use, pill use in your family, that didn't turn you off?
Yeah, I guess I've never thought about it like that. And again, and to speak honestly, like my mother's an alcoholic. She's found her own solution to that. I guess it doesn't involve any type of fellowship work, but now looking back at it, I can see that alcohol did for her exactly what opiates did for me. So but no, I didn't look at it the same for whatever reason that was. And I think typically if you ask anyone, like they would never see what they're doing in the moment as a severe issue as it is. To me, I know I just spent, I spend lots of money on this thing. And when I do it with my friends or if I do it by myself, it just makes me feel the way that I want to feel. And fast forward, obviously, like, having with addiction being rooted primarily in selfishness, right? Like I become real selfish in the sense that like, I'm so concerned with how I feel, that I'm going to do whatever I have to do to continue to feel that way. So, as more of whatever substance is required, I begin to steal things. I begin to, kind of like burn friends. And like, then I'm kind of like cornering myself into a lonelier box. But at the end of the day, it's still okay, because like, again, Oxycontin, or, you know, which later led to heroin and led to cocaine use and things like that. Like, they were still doing what they had always done by making me feel at ease, you know, essentially. They take away that feeling in my soul and in my heart and in my stomach, and they make me at ease. And again, at that point, it's still kind of an asinine idea for me to not do it, because to not do it brings me back to the way that I felt from, you know, basically 17 years old prior, you know.
Was 17 when you picked up?
Pretty much, yeah. And like, as far as getting sober and at a young age, hopefully my thought process can make sense here, but I'm kind of grateful for the opiate epidemic, in the sense that I think it allows people to get beat up much faster, and it allows people to get sober quicker. I mean, obviously the downside to that is you know, the countless amounts of people that overdose, like, before they are able to kind of lose enough. But for me personally, I basically used from 17 to 20. You know, it was 3 years, and but God, was it a gross, fastly progressing 3 years? You know, like, my life gets to a point where I never, ever wanted it to be. And then the things that I had like strive for were just so far out of reach at that point, that's kind of, you know, where that tipping point is, I guess.
It was such a short span for you, and you got sober before you were 21, in early 20s. Did you ever have that mindset of it was just a phase, or, you know, it's your party years, kind of regretting?
I definitely, like, I would say in my first few years of recovery, I questioned that, you know, and it can quickly, you know, my mind can be put at ease just really vividly remembering where my life had gone. And that's what I tell anybody that I've ever worked with, as far as trying to help others get better, or help family members understand kind of what this illness looks like, is that, like, for me personally, I have to really grab on to like certain feelings, certain instances, certain nights, certain, you know, scenarios that I got myself in, and be like, dude, no other 19 or 20-year-old should be where you are. Like, if you're like going out quite a bit and drinking, you know, and, you know, maybe you black out and whatever happens, like, maybe you could write that off as like kind of a coming to age experience. But like, I mean, at the end of the day, I was, you know, breaking into people's houses to supply like an intravenous heroin habit. That's not like where people should get to, regardless of their adolescence, you know? So definitely like keeping that at the forefront of my mind and remembering what it looked like helps me try to not rationalize like, yeah, I could probably drink a beer, or I could probably have a glass of champagne at my wedding, because it's just not worth it. It's not a, you know, not a gamble I'm willing to take, I guess. Yeah, and like throughout this point, this is pretty important. When I tell my story, I guess, is I had tried a few things to like get better on my own as my habits started to progress. And, you know, basically it was to the point where if I got paid like on a Thursday night, I had no money by a Friday night kind of thing. And I like gave one of my best friends my debit card, right? Like I said, like, hey man, like I need help. Just hold this. Don't let me take any money out. Like, you know, and that would last for around like 24 hours. And then, you know, I'm like borderline willing to fight one of my best friends to get access to my money. You know, and actually, you know, the small things, I remember when the first few years I tell my story, it's like, I'd get into like depth about toxic relationships and all the arrests, and I guess the like glorifying war stories, which I've like, as I've grown, learn are kind of irrelevant. I think like how we get better is way more important than like what it looked like, because it looks like, I mean, shit, it kind of looks like the same for everybody. You know, it's the more...
In one sense or another, absolutely.
It seems like you just hear the same stuff over and over again. But this is again like the one of the images and one of the feelings I try to keep in the forefront of my life today is, you know, I had been kicked out of my parents' house and, you know, still had a pretty crazy habit, and I was able to like kick that habit just on my friend Pete's couch. And
The heroin?
yeah, at that point it was Oxycontin, Percocet, heroin. Kicked like all physical dependency to that. Enrolled into the New Hampshire Technical Institute, which is in southern New Hampshire. I actually started it was a LADAC course. It was a certificate, like a licensed alcohol and drug counselor course.
Oh, okay.
So they had a certificate program there to basically become a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. And I'm, mind you, a week and a half, 2 weeks removed from a pretty, gruesome opiate habit. And like, I thought that would be a good idea. So at this point, like I'm in school, I have no physical dependency to anything. I have an apartment with a couple of great friends. Like on the outside looking in, everything's okay. Like things are starting to get better. I'm sure my parents could finally maybe sleep a little bit, like things are going well. One day leaving class, after, like I said, my first few weeks of attempting that, the idea came into my mind that like, hey, you're doing great. Why don't you go, call this kid and go get high, and like you deserve it, or whatever it was. And
reward.
What's that?
A reward.
A reward, almost. Yeah. Sure. Like as if that makes sense. But that was like, the first time that I was really able to feel and experience what the mental obsession of drug addiction and alcoholism looks like, where I have no defense against that. And I had no defense against it that night, and I have no, real defense against it today, outside of doing work to, I guess, eliminate the potential. But like I said, I threw, everything was going well, and then I threw it all away because of a thought that crept into my mind. And that was like really terrifying for me. And then it was kind of like up and at 'em again, and stopped paying rent, started using, got like a couple of my best friends evicted because they couldn't float my portion of the rent. There was a lot of arrests at this point too. And I was out on bail for some pretty serious charges, directly relating to drug use. And what I look at the first step of recovery in a real basic sense was that like my life was heading in a direction and or like already at that spot. And like, I never wanted it to be there. And another way that I kind of, have explained this portion to people or someone that might not understand it is that also I said towards the beginning that, I used these drugs as a solution for a long time, but they were no longer working for me, in the sense that I wanted them to. They weren't taking away that feeling. They weren't, it wasn't my solution anymore. It was just something that I like had to do. So, really what anyone looks like, I would assume towards the end of their using, is that like my life is just real dark and lonely. I have no friends. No one cares about me because I've just burnt everything. My parents don't return my phone calls. And again, like that's okay if the drugs are doing what they're supposed to, but then they stop. And it was some of the loneliest, darkest feelings that I wouldn't wish upon anyone. I've never felt that before, and that's where it kind of needed to get for me, to be able to ask for help, and what that looked like, because I'm so timid of my father and like disappointing that side of my family. My mom and dad are divorced. They got divorced when I was super young, so that's not prevalent really. But I called my mom. She lives in Tennessee. She still does to this day, and basically, spewed out everything and where my life had gone and what was going and what was taking place. And I did that really kind of low key, knowing she'd call my dad, so I didn't have to. So that was probably at 10 o'clock at night, and at 7 o'clock in the morning, they were at an apartment to kind of like bring me to get help.
So let's backtrack a little bit. You
Please.
said that you pretty much detoxed on Pete's couch. What got you to that point? Like what changed? Like, oh, okay, I gotta get sober.
Yeah, it was all kind of like my external world just crashing in on my like little weird personal like using drug world. And like I had like this really awful habit where I'd break into people's houses. Like I was just trying to like feed this habit by taking things that aren't mine. And that looked like multiple arrests. I was looking at, a pretty substantial sentence for breaking and entering. New Hampshire's really not that kind, or at this point, especially, they weren't super kind to people with addiction issues. And that was terrifying. Like, I was kind of like I said, from the rip, like, I was raised in a really great family, and they gave me all the love and things that I ever needed. So just the idea of potentially going to jail for my actions was, terrifying, and enough to get me to, maybe like have a moment of clarity where it's like, okay, none of this would happen if you didn't have, these the addiction issues. Mm-hmm. So we should try to stop that.
So you came to that realization by yourself?
I came to the realization, I mean, I'm sure there was, honestly not super clear anymore, mm-hmm. but I'm sure there was nudging from some of the close people in my life, whether it be, my friend Pete or, a few of my cousins, my family. But like, I was pretty reclusive in the sense that I didn't let a lot of people into like what was really going on.
Yeah, well, when you do that, then you're jeopardizing this passion that you have with drugs. If you're letting other people in, letting them know what's going on, they're going to take that away from you, right? So that's why I didn't tell anyone.
I mean, 100%. And to try to take that away from me again is taking away what then was my solution to life. So I was very, very protective of that, yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, it's funny, man, like being in the recovery community, being in the community period, like now when I see someone, and to not project, but who I would assume has what looks like to be an opiate problem, I mean, God, do we stand out? So like, for me to think that, people around me couldn't see that was so naive. But I think it's also like a part of them knows that until I wanted to do something and change, that there was almost like no point. And I still feel like that, honestly, to this day, where that time on where I tried to do it on my own, like, maybe I was like 50-50. Like maybe part of me wanted something to change, but I really didn't, know, like I just wanted things to not be quite as bad.
Right. Whatever way that looks, we don't know at that time. When I got sober, I had no idea what 12-step fellowship was. I never knew what rehab was.
No. Right.
I had no idea. Right.
Yeah.
But I knew that I wanted to be better. I don't know what that looks like, but
100%.
I still want to keep my lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Like, yeah,
I want
like
best of both worlds, but I can't have it.
No, I couldn't agree more. And that's honestly, that's even what it looked like, when I genuinely reached out for help, and my parents, my stepmother and father were able to take me to, I mean, at this point too, like New Hampshire didn't have any like really cushy detoxes. I wish they had, but mm-hmm. they brought me to the emergency room. We had some instructions from like another family friend that basically just she was advising me to lie to them, so they would keep me. So basically, I said, "Hey, I'm withdrawing from alcohol and benzodiazepines, and if I don't do that here, I'm gonna die." And they like had to admit me, and that wasn't the case. But basically, my family knew that I had to be admitted somewhere. So I spent a few days there, and then just wound up at a rehab, and again at a treatment facility in central New Hampshire, and I didn't know anything about treatment. I had never been to an AA meeting. Mm-hmm. I didn't know there was a book, that outlined a way to get better. I had never heard anything about this. But it's funny that you said that you didn't necessarily know what that was going to look like, because it was very much so my experience, where I figured I was going to go into some place for like 2 weeks, and I was just going to just come back out and like kind of live a similar lifestyle, but like maybe not as crazy, like not as much drugs, Right.
Or as much drama. Yeah. I might only break into one house every other week or something.
No. And again, looking back on it now, and this kid Pete I keep talking about is still one of the only kids that I've kept in contact with from New Hampshire, from my childhood, from, my high school. And, I remember like the morning I was going to treatment, I called his phone, right before my parents probably took my phone from me. Like, you don't need that anymore. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, listen, man, like, it's going to be so great. Like, I'm just going to go away for a little bit. And I'm going to come out, and like I'm going to have so much more money. We can buy like motorcycles, and we're going to just have fun. And, everything's, and like, mm-hmm. in hindsight, right, I look back and like, and I've had really great conversations with Pete throughout this and through the amends process and stuff to fast forward. But where like I made that phone call and I went to treatment, and then literally 10 years later, I haven't been back. You know what I mean? So like from his perspective, I felt really guilty about that. Like he was losing a brother and a best friend, and so was I, in the sense of like, things are going to look dramatically different. Like I'm never going to live there again. I'm not going to live with you again. And, you know, I went into treatment for what was supposed to be a few weeks, and I was there for 3 months.
Wow.
And this was at that point, and it still is, it was a 12-step based treatment. So I was able to, like, for the first time in my life, be told what was wrong with me. And that was like a really, like, kind of like scary and, you know, reassuring thing, right? Where like these guys and girls and women were standing in front of me, and they said, hey, we used to do what you did, and like, this is what we got better, and like how we got better. You know, I said, like, at the beginning that I used to be pretty convinced that I was broken like no one else was. So at that point, I knew that that wasn't correct, that like other people had felt the way that I had felt, found a solutions through drugs, through alcohol, through gambling, through whatever, you know, their choice was. But then there was like a common solution and how they, you know, got better. And it caught my attention enough for me to like just listen and, you know, attempt what they were trying to have me do. You know, so I was able to actually write a 4-step in there. And again, I mentioned that because I had this kind of important experience through that time where when I was writing and really focusing on, like, I mean, literally that was my only goal for the day, right? Like you would write your inventory, you know, eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and smoke some cigarettes in between, I guess. But I had noticed that I had gone a few days without thinking about using. And like, that was like a really powerful experience, where prior to that, like, quite literally the only thing that was ever on my mind was, how do I get more money to keep using the way that I want to? And that thought didn't stop for years, where now I'm like in this facility and I'm writing, you know, down all this stuff that, you know, is kind of hurtful and it sucks to look at. But then I didn't think about that, you know, so I kind of started to think like, well, if I continue on this and I continue honestly, does that mean like I can live the rest of my life without thinking about, you know, getting high every second? Like, because if that's the case, like, I'm in, you know. I hate to speak as like for recovery as a whole, because we can't do that, right? Like, I can only speak from my experience and potentially, you know, those of people that I'm really close with. But like, personally, if being in recovery, you know, it looks like a constant state of like vigilance and, you know, suffering with the thought of being able to use, or like, you know, like, I don't want to do that. It just seems like too much, right? Like, if it's just a constant kind of white knuckle kind of like struggle to not, you know, get high or drink for the rest of your life, I would rather just kind of keep getting high and drinking until eventually I die from it. That sounds pretty gruesome, but yeah, so you know, I was told you know, by these people that I really respected, and by, I guess, a few of my first sponsors, that that's not the case, and that you know, if you do this, you can essentially change the way your mind works.
Yeah.
You know, and then that constant thought won't be there anymore, and then, you know, what you have to do to defend against that thought is just keep, you know, trying to grow along spiritual lines and changing, you know, who you are as a person and being helpful. So that's okay.
Do you ever get thoughts now?
I don't, honestly. In the sense of, I was just having this conversation with a client the other day, so it's fresh, but in the sense of heroin, I honestly haven't thought about using heroin in over 10 years. So from the time I got sober, I really haven't had like an obsession or a desire to use in that sense. But my cocaine use really fucked with me for a while, for probably, honestly, like years into my recovery, just in the sense of drug dreams and just I think that I think that substance in general really just latches onto people's minds a little harder. And that was something that I had to work on. And I guess like what it would look like for me today, if it is a thought, it's really fleeting and doesn't really have any power, is more along the lines of drinking, right? Like I'm 30 years old. I've never had a legal drink. So when I'm with my fiance, or if I'm out with friends and we're spending some money at a nice dinner place and they're drinking wine, it's like, that's cool. Like that would be cool. But again, like, the way that I look at this is I've lost my privilege to like use anything in our world, based on my actions and like who I am as a person. Like drinking is a privilege. Like people that are able to go have fun at a concert on a Saturday night and do whatever, like it's a privilege, and like that's fine, and that it's just gone for me, And that's typically like how that thought process works. It's like, oh, dude, I've never even had wine. I wonder if that's good with a nice steak. Well, sucks, dude. You can't have it. It's like, it doesn't really have much weight anymore.
Now, what do you tell yourself to not pick up that drink or another drug? Besides like the loss of your privilege, is there anything else of like, because I know for me, one is too many, 1,000 is never enough, right? If I pick up, I am going to have more.
Yes.
Because if I pick up one, if I have a sip of wine, like that doesn't make sense to me,
100%.
right? Like why am I going to even pick it up if I'm not going to get shitty off of it?
So I've been lucky enough to never have to, I'm kind of blanking on, like, I've never had to do that, like self-experimentation with alcohol. Like, I think like the book mentions that, like, hey, if you think you can do some controlled drinking, like go test it, man, right. see what happens. With drug use, I know without a doubt what that looks like for me. I misspoke at the beginning when I said that I wasn't picky. I actually was incredibly picky. I liked opiates. I liked cocaine. Like, I don't want your benzos. I wanted like one of two things. So like, I know that whatever I put into my body, I'm most likely going to reach towards the things that I like. And then the way I look at alcohol use is pretty much exactly like you, right? Like I'm making hand motions, but like if I don't want when I've been up here with like the drugs that I like to use, I don't want to be here with your IPA at dinner. Like right. It's just not the same, right? Like, and I haven't had to, like I said, test that personally, but like it's just a very real truth that is in my being. Like I just know that that's how I operate. So, and then another thing too, and I don't know if this is even like acceptable to say, but given my experience with like really awful substance use, period, and then having literally almost no experience with alcohol, it's not as hard for me to miss something that I didn't have.
Okay, yeah.
And also like I know we're supposed to be defeating ego, but from a real egocentric place, like I like to say that I've put literally no substances into my body for X amount of years. I like it. I
do too.
It's fun for me,
Yeah. I know some people are like, it's not about the years, and it's like, honestly, it fucking is for me. Yeah. Because I have over 8 years that I haven't had like, that's a lot for me, where before I couldn't even go
8 hours.
Yeah, 8 minutes.
Yeah.
Without getting high, and now I'm 8 years. Fuck yeah, I'm gonna boast about it.
100%. And I guess like, to paint a picture of what that looks like for me is, and I have some really close friends who I made in recovery who have since, I guess you could say, gone back out, but not necessarily in the way that like some might think that looks. Right. Like that means they had a really bad heroin problem, and then they were sober for 5 years, and then they made a conscious decision to drink. Right. And so now they drink. But when I hear that come up in conversations, like, I don't like the way it sounds. They're like, yeah, no, I'm sober, man. I've been sober for like 5 years. Well, I drink now. And I'm like, then you're not. Then you can't say that.
So your personal opinion of being sober is...
I think it's complete abstinence.
Okay, exactly.
Personally,
yeah, absolutely. Me too. Me too.
Like, you can say that you used to have a drug issue that you like worked on and fixed. And like, that's fine, and like... the reason that I hold that near to me is I think that it's a really dangerous stance for kids like myself and for a lot of other friends and people that I've met in recovery. Is like you could essentially kill someone with your experience. And I don't like that. So you could say like, hey man, I had a heroin problem too. And then I like fixed it. And now I drink and smoke weed every once in a while. I'll be like, dude, you can't say that to certain people.
Right. Because then they're going to think it's okay. And then they're going to go out and
they could die, you know? And like, and I hate to be like gruesome. I back to my early recovery, I spent 1.5 years in a sober house. Like I'm a big advocate for sober living.
Nice.
I think it's really important for like that real like transitional phase of someone's recovery where they're growing and they're having these experiences to be like surrounded by people that are doing the same thing. So like, I really think that my time and you know, involved in that house, and I'm still involved in that house as a mentor, it's made me kind of cold to recovery because like I just see so many people kind of coming in and out. But like I look at things in a very black and white way, you know. So it's, if you tell that kid that like, hey, someday, man, if you keep doing these steps and you know, change, like you might be able to drink. Like, no, you're like, you could just genuinely be killing that kid, you know, that person. That's that if that was your experience, that's great. But that's most likely not going to be theirs if they're truly an alcoholic, you know, described to us by that book. You know, you're lying to them.
I also feel that way when you hear it in the book of like, you mentioned it before, if you think you can drink or have controlled drink, go try it.
Yeah, sure.
You know, but okay, you say that to a sponsee or, you know, a fellow, they could die.
The thought too that I shared earlier about me being, from my own experience, kind of grateful for this younger, my generation opiate epidemic, that suggestion doesn't work for us, right? So like that is the downside. I think it's able to beat people up really quick and it allows people to want to change faster maybe, but like I would never ever tell someone to go try some like controlled opiate using. It doesn't work like that. You know, it's not like when the big book was written, it's like, dude, yeah, go sit down at a bar and have a shot and maybe you go on a 2-week run and we'll see you back here. Like, so that is kind of the downfall, I would say, of like more like of the drug use side of things, but
well, I think it's the same for alcohol. If you're an alcoholic,
right,
it's the same thing.
100%.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, it's I was mentioning to you, I think before you started the recording equipment, that a few years ago, it was probably like a year prior to the shutdown of 2020, I was asked to join this meeting called the Family Restored, that does stuff for like families and loved ones. And that's been like a whole nother awakening for me in the sense of like what it is that we put our families and friends through. You know, and like it's basically, I guess, like Al-Anon, but ran by alcoholics and addicts who have like step work experience. So we can basically like tell parents and brothers and sisters and sons or whatever, like the manipulation that they're seeing, and that it's like not genuine, and that it's manipulation. You know, and I've based a lot of my own personal experience on like what I see them going through now is like the same thing that my parents went through then. And like, you know, there's just no, I lost my train of thought there, but
no, that's okay. So in regards to this meeting, you mentioned manipulation. What would you tell a family member about manipulation?
I mean, 100%. Like we have a gentleman right now whose, you know, daughter is in and out of recovery, and like she just got kicked out of a sober house because she was late. In my opinion, that's manipulation. Like, right? Like, you know, or like, hey, like now I need money to fix my car. I'm drinking again. I went off the road and you know, popped all my tires. Like you're manipulating that like parental instinct of like, I need to help my child. I need to like, if they don't have a car, they can't, like, no, man, like they can figure it out. You know, I'm pretty, another like, I guess way that I've started to look at this and I've become like more, like tough love in the sense of like the addict or the alcoholic, and more like very remorseful and compassionate with like the parents. Cause it was this real like weird awakening thing for me. I remember the first meeting that I spent here at the family resort. I like called both my father, my stepmother, my mother, like crying that night. Cause I was like, dude, like, I'm sorry again. I know I've said sorry. I know I've made amends, but like, it's just shitty what we do to you, and they don't see it that, like, they're like, well, you're okay, bud. Just keep doing. But it really put it into perspective. Just seeing some other people face to face and like what it looks like for them. I was always so like selfish in my using, where I was like, things are so bad, and like I'm gonna go to jail and this and that, and like I would then ingest enough Oxycontin and like pass out, and like wake up again and do it the next day. Like my parents had to like not use medications or anything that made them feel better, and like not sleep because they didn't know if I was dead or not. So like it's put a lot of things in perspective for me in that sense. And when I see people that like refuse to get better, it like, I guess it just is it's like plucking at a different part of my heart now, where I'm like, yeah, man, you should get better for your mom, your dad, your grandma, your friends. Like, you like owe it to them at least.
Right. Well, a lot of people say you shouldn't get sober for other people, right?
Right.
But for me, if you know my story, I got sober because they were going to take my nephew away from me. I had to get sober for other people. And now, I mean, I stay sober for myself in turn, so I can have those people in my life, right? Mm-hmm. Some people say that you shouldn't get sober for other people. It needs to be about yourself. And it's like, whatever is going to get you sober, fucking do it.
I agree. Yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily a clear-cut way. And like a few things that I was thinking about that I wanted to share with you on this today is like, I had a really similar experience to that while I was in treatment. So I was there for 3 months. Let's say the first few months were great, but like after being in this kind of like confined area, like I started to like lose my mind a little bit, right? Like I didn't want to be there anymore. I used to sell drugs and buy drugs at Plymouth State University. I know that's like a mile down the road. I could easily just like leave and go there.
Right.
And at that point, to piggyback off what you just explained, like the only thought that night when I was just like, dude, maybe I should just run, was like, no, man, like think about how disappointed that, all the people in your life will be if you do that, so like, all
right, let's try that again. Everything died. Okay.
All
right. So your family meeting. See, we already lost our train of thought. We thought we knew we had it.
Oh, so, well, actually my next train of thought was something that I wanted to mention, that I try not to hide from. And I try like to just be honest about when I share, is I had another experience, probably honestly at this point about like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Where like the importance of the work that got me better, I was reminded of, right? Because like I stepped away from meetings for a long time. I stepped away from being useful for a long time, and got to see the consequences of that, where essentially I was really lucky and grateful, to the point where I didn't pick up, I didn't like run towards that solution. But my actions in my mind was that again of like a selfish, person with no solution, right? Where like at that point I reached for any outside, source of like happiness, i.e. that looks like women, that looks like working really hard, that looks like, basically anything to take me out of myself. And it just, like my mind just went like to a real shitty place of like selfishness again. And I was just reminded like, hey, this is, and again, how I look at myself, I guess this is who you are with like no solution. Like if you don't have drugs and you don't have the solution of like a 12-step spiritual life, this is who you are. So I was reminded of that to the point of like, just like I was reminded of certain things like in my first, few months of being sober, like, hey, this is what I have to do to not think that way. Or like, and I was super grateful for that experience. And it got me back into like, basically things like this, or it got me back into like being useful and mentoring the sober house or the family meeting or anything like that. And that was important. I hear about that when people share and they've been sober for a long period of time, where, maybe they've just like genuine unhappiness in recovery. And it's like just as important for me to hear that. And it reminds me of like why it is that we do what we do. Because otherwise, like if someone's just, puts on a face and they like say everything's wonderful all the time and like, things couldn't be better. Like sometimes I feel like, that might not necessarily be the case. And, for me personally, like I just wanted to be like just decent all the time. Like, let me just be like, okay. And I'm totally happy with maneuvering through life in like an okay state with, moments of like real gratitude and real happiness and real sadness. Like, let me feel emotions, and like, the 12 steps and stuff like that are definitely my only way to achieve that, I guess. But
so it was kind of like changing one addiction for another at some point in your life of like, I'm walking away slowly from, my resources, and now I'm picking up, bad behaviors with women and bad behaviors in other areas of your life, right?
100%. I guess like, my like natural MO as a human being is to just reach for things that make me happy.
Yeah.
And it's just the only thing in my life that has made sense and make me happy without immediate negative consequences is step work. It's just the only thing. But like naturally, if I step away from that work and I start to like not be okay, I'm going to reach back towards things, that make me feel good. 'Cause like, that's what I'm concerned about. And like, they have like immediate negative consequences, right? Whatever those things are.
So what other things besides 12 step would help you not get to that point?
I mean, really, like, if I'm not actively doing, and because I'm not, right? Like, I'm not actively doing step work like I did when I first got sober. Like I haven't written a 4-step in quite some time. I haven't read, inventory in a while, but like really it's more so about like just constantly trying to not be a shitty person, I guess. Like just to constantly be helpful. And that looks like a lot of things. If that's just a genuine conversation with another human being.
Yet again, technical difficulties and dogs barking. And so we were talking about what you do to not fall back into old behaviors, being a genuine person, having a conversation with someone. What else?
Yeah, absolutely. Like aside from like generic, regular kind of fellowship and step work. I mean, for me now, it just looks like being, a good coworker, essentially a good boss at this point, I guess. I can talk about what it looked like for me to open a business. A good partner in my relationship. I mean, really, like, I can like have conversations with people now, especially if someone's like talking about their own issues and like, maybe looking for solutions to them, where prior to that, man, like especially when I used to get high, I had no desire to listen to anyone. I couldn't sit and have a conversation. If I was high, I could sit with you for hours, but like prior to that, there's just no way. Like, I was so concerned about myself and had just no shits to give whatsoever about like any other human being that, I just wanted to be alone and like not talk to anyone and not be useful.
Right.
And I remember you had mentioned about like what it looked like to start a business, and I'm a barber. I cut hair, and that has kind of a funny story to it as well. Like when I first got sober, I was in the restaurant industry still, which I feel like a lot of people are. It's just like a great job to do while you can kind of do it fucked up and like not show up.
Right.
And, but I hated it, right? Like I really didn't like that lifestyle. I wasn't passionate about food. And I remember in my first few years, I was like actively thinking about like, what could I do as an uneducated, right? Like no college degree felon. Like what can I do?
Right.
And I hope, yeah. It like literally like cutting hair like came into my mind. And at first it was like more of just like the lifestyle of it looked appealing. It was just, you could like dress the way you want to dress and be creative and like talk to people all day. And I was like, sure, let me give that a shot. And like then, obviously since I've fallen in love with hair and I have a passion about it. But like that's honestly what it looked like at first. It was me just trying to like figure out in early recovery what I could do to like build a career for something that I guess was like available to me. And I was able to open up a shop with a few friends, a tattoo shop and a barber shop. We opened in June. It's definitely the first of its kind in this state. I grew up going to one in southern New Hampshire, so I knew it had been done and it could work.
That's awesome.
And it's been a great experience. And, like now, like, and I don't know if this is, a common trait of people like in recovery, or if it's something like that's, just a character defect, but my mind can get really hyper focused on things. And, what that looks like is like, especially during that process of trying to get something off the ground. And like, for me, it's just so important I like basically have to make like to-do lists or like nothing will get done. Like my mind will basically just think about everything really hard, but like there'll be no action towards anything. So I'm trying to navigate that and like, keeping a running like, hey, this is what you should aim to get done immediately, or like these are your goals. So like try to put these down on paper as well.
Little goals to make big dreams.
100%. Yep. Yeah. Like the fact that my brain will kind of get obsessed and fixate on things is like not an issue, because like when I end up tackling those things, I tend to like try to do well at them, but it's the issue in the sense of like, if I don't put action into that, like nothing will get done, I guess. Yeah. It's kind of the same thing. I mean, it's a pretty similar experience in like recovery in general. Like if I don't put action into something, I can think about it all day, but it's just never gonna work, and it's never gonna kind of come to fruition.
So it's taking action to move forward, be a good person, not be selfish. It's just like the fruits of, recovery and what it looks like, the beauty of it all, right?
No, definitely.
Now you have an awesome business, and you've been, 10 years sober?
Yeah, and May 11th was 10 years.
Oh my God. Look at you.
I appreciate that so much. Yeah, and it's it definitely is a part of my life now to just not hide from that. Like I again, when I'm like some random client, I'm probably not gonna like openly come out and say like, hey man, just so you know, I used to do heroin and now I don't.
Right.
It's just
right.
Because it's not the time or place for it. But I'm very much so like I don't hide my recovery, and I think it's really important that no one does, and that like and that's kind of I don't know, it's a beautiful thing that's happening. I feel like more and more as 2021, rewind 15 years, and I think it was like very hidden. I think people kept it within their families, and people didn't talk about it. Embarrassed and ashamed, and like, and again, like, don't get me wrong, it can be a very embarrassing and shameful and like hurtful process as an addict or as the family of one, but like to keep that, to yourself and to not like reach out to a community for help is it's just so counterproductive. So I'm definitely glad that the stigma is kind of like lifting there, and it's I don't know, it's a beautiful life when you like finally break down and try to change things and reach for help.
Now, in wrapping up, because I have anxiety that this is gonna shit out on us again, let's talk about what you want our listeners to take away. What would you like them to take away? What would you like to say to a newcomer or someone struggling or thinking about relapse? Like what's like the number one advice? Or 3, doesn't matter.
Number 1 or 3. I mean, like a real simple way that I've broken down my own experience, because like I had some people really close that in my eyes were doing much better than me fall off and go back out, and that used to like really mess with me as I was like in an early sobriety. Like, what are they doing that I'm not? Like, I don't understand. So really, like, to just like take your own experience and do it honestly. I think that's the real important part, because I've had nothing like a picture perfect experience in recovery. I've fucked up. I've written a lot of inventory. Like, I mean, like it has not been ideal, but like, for me to be honest about my shortcomings are what's really important, and then like actively and mindfully try to do my best to like remedy them and fix them. And also like a big reason why I'm such a component for sober living is because it's a constant avenue to be useful to other people. So whether you've been in that environment for a month and some dude moves in with a day, like you can then automatically be useful to that person.
Be of service.
100%. Like the more often I'm like having conversations with other human beings, whether they're in recovery or not, everyone everyone could be talked to, everyone can be listened to. The more I'm thinking about other people is the less I'm thinking about myself. And I
love that.
It's important. I mean, I'm selfish. I like to think about myself. So like if I'm not, and I'm thinking about, how can I help this other person out, or, it's always been beneficial for me and never a negative thing.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, something's bound to happen with this thing with all the complications we had. So let's call it quits for today.
100%.
And we can talk about doing a part 2.
If you'd have me back, I'd love to. So that sounds great.
Great. All right.
you.
We out. Bye.